Shawn, welcome to the Better Podcast. I'm so happy that you're here with me today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well.
We were introduced, I think Chris Winfield introduced us, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we became fast friends. I remember we had our first Zoom call and we had pretty much identical philosophies in terms of the ketogenic diet and the application of it. And yeah, so it's been a dream. Sometimes when you are in the online space and you're kind of doing your own thing, you sort of feel like you're the only warrior on the down, fighting the battles. But it was really nice for me at least, when I first met you, I was like, oh man, there's like other people like me. This is so great. So yeah, really excited to be talking to you today. We're going to be talking about keto, but I really do want to take a specific focus and we're going to geek out hard today and really talk about your passion, which is, you have a lot of passions, but when I've heard you speak and when you and I have had the privilege of speaking, you talk a lot about mitochondrial health. And
Mhm.
I've heard you say, mito is the new keto. So I definitely want to be geeking out on mitochondrial health, what we are
Yeah,
doing in terms of, things that may be potentially sabotaging our energy, and then, strategies and tactics to help increase energetic production and support mitochondrial health.
100%. I'm all about it. Let's do it.
Okay. So for the listener, if you've never heard of what a mitochondria is, let's just lay it out. What is a mitochondria? How is energy made? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so it goes back to, they probably have heard it's the powerhouse of the cell.
Hmm.
And it's like an organelle in the cell. And I should say, this might surprise people that even know what a mitochondria is. They might think that there's one. You always are taught that in a biology textbook, but the more intensive the energy is required of that cell, let's say in a heart cell, a cardio, like pericardial cell or something like that, it would have up to 5,000
Right.
mitochondria in a cell. So people might not realize that, but the mitochondria is kind of like a heart for the cell, let's say, just like the heart is to our body. Like it's this thing that is the little energy powerhouse, like they say, and it creates adenosine triphosphate ATP, which is the energy currency for the body. And that's involved in the electron transport chain. And people might remember the Krebs cycle, which is now typically called the citric acid cycle, the TCA.
Hmm.
And that is involved in this energy creation. What happens, though, that's so important that we're finding out why I say mito is the new keto is that we are often in insufficient cellular energy states, which is an acronym called ICE. And there's something else that's in neurological diseases. It's a very similar idea called brain energy gap.
Hmm.
And in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and some of these diseases, you find that same concept. But essentially, whether it's insufficient cellular energy or brain energy gap, you're saying that we need this much energy, but we're making this much energy. And for those of you that can't see what I'm doing, I'm saying that there's basically a shortfall of energy.
Right.
And and that's the whole insufficient cellular energy. And then what happens as a result is we get chronic oxidation, chronic insulin elevation, chronic glycation, chronic inflammation. And any of those things aren't necessarily bad. We always think they sound bad. Insulin needs to go up and down as blood glucose becomes available, and that's okay. And inflammation going up and down is okay with the immune system and the immune response, and that's fine. And uh, oxidation is often like a signal that's important for repair and all those kinds of things. That's great. But when we're chronically in these states, that's where a lot of disease and biological aging happens. And we're aging faster than our chronological age. And so that's where it becomes problematic is this issue of chronic oxidation, chronic glycation, chronic inflammation. And we see that with mitochondrial dysfunction. And it kind of plays into it both ways. Mitochondrial dysfunction creates those issues, and those issues create worse mitochondrial dysfunction. But essentially, That's what you're seeing. You're seeing a shortfall of energy, and you're seeing, as a result, a lot of these other things start to happen that set you up for nearly all chronic disease and biological aging. So
So
it's
let's
so
yeah,
important, so important.
let's talk about glycation. And for the listener who's never heard of that term, that is when a sugar is creating a bond with a protein or a lipid, and that ends up making the protein or the lipid, whatever it's attaching to, it tends to denature, or it tends to create it becomes malformed, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
when we think about the different types of sugars, we have glucose, we have fructose, we have galactose, all these things. But fructose also is very much, it has 10 times the glycation activity than glucose does, right? So this is, when we're talking about this in the context of aging, and we're talking about this in the context of mitochondrial health, the more fructose that you're consuming, the faster you are, biologically aging, maybe, and you are maybe surpassing your chronological age with the more fructose that you consume there. But this also has really important implications for our cardiovascular health, because if it affects the collagen proteins in our in our blood vessels, then that is going to really affect the way that the vessels dilate and constrict. Normally, it's going to affect blood pressure, all those things.
Yeah, so advanced glycation end products are so aptly named as
Aged.
AGEs.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of like the standard American diet acronym being SAD.
Right.
It's like
Right.
one of those perfect acronyms. But yeah, exactly. You're exactly right that glycation is really out of control and correlated to all these metabolic diseases. And when insulin, you have glucose elevated, and then insulin stays elevated, and then that leads to inflammation and oxidation. But you also have like some of these um, rampant uh, growth factors that can sometimes be an issue, just like muscle protein synthesis when out of check can be an issue. It's basically like we always hear that muscle protein synthesis should be a good thing, but there are times when anabolism in cancer is not a good thing. So
Mm-hmm.
and we see that with elevated insulin, elevated growth factors, elevated blood glucose, some of those kinds of scenarios. But those lead into nearly all the chronic diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's. Like Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes, and cancer is propagated from blood glucose. We know that. Like PCOS is essentially ovarian diabetes, and
Right.
just goes on and on and on.
So how would somebody, if somebody's like, gosh, am I glycating at a higher rate than I should be? Am I having, like, how would somebody know, or how could somebody figure out whether or not they have accelerated glycation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, one of the things that I would love to do is just have like a couple simple labs. I think we've talked about it before, and I know you have maybe some different labs that you use, but I think just hemoglobin A1C would be simple to look at, because glucose is a little too transient. And there's certainly other things that you could look at as well, but hemoglobin A1C is quick and easy. And then, looking at inflammation, you could use CRP, and then oxidation, maybe like oxidized LDL. But you could look at these things and whichever lab you want to use, but essentially, ways that you could track inflammation, oxidation, glycation. You could say, you could come up with some algorithm or score for like your mitochondrial health and
Mm-hmm.
say, here's how much I aged today. Here's how much like I'm more at risk now for all chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, kind of like you might wear a BioStrap or Aura ring or whatever. It would be so great if we could literally track these things often. But I feel like for $100 twice a year, we could radically reshape medicine by just looking at some simple labs. And we don't look at CRP until you have cardiovascular disease. We don't look at hemoglobin A1C until you already have diabetes. But
Mm-hmm.
if we were looking at these ahead of time, we could say that, hey, Shawn, you're biologically aging way faster than your chronological age. You're at 30% more risk for all these different disease states. Maybe we should make some changes and put you on something that helps with glycation, like berberine, which I think is probably the most important natural
Not the
compound.
fashion label, but a supplement.
Yeah,
Not
exactly.
Burberry.
No, not berberine. Berberine. Yeah, exactly. But I think that's actually the most important supplement, like ahead of fish oil, creatine, D3, multivitamin, some basics that I'd recommend that I think are all great. I would say berberine is the single most important compound you can take. It's been shown in studies to be as effective, if not more effective, than metformin, which is known as an incredible glucose disposal agent, insulin
Right.
sensitivity, anti-aging, studied with telomeres and mitochondrial function, and on and on and on. A lot of anti-aging people have been using it for years, about 20 years now. But it's even more powerful than that, and it's natural. And then the polyphenols in general are really powerful with blood sugar. So, and the great thing about polyphenols, check out this list. So EGCG from green tea, pterostilbene from blueberries. You can go to dark chocolate, red wine, resveratrol, all these things, like the things that we tend to enjoy, coffee, have high polyphenols. So when we're eating like these high polyphenol foods, it helps with both blood flow and blood sugar. So that's a great approach to dealing with some of these issues.
Yeah, I like that there's a cost-effective approach. Like when we look at HbA1c, if for the listener who's never heard of that, that's basically an average, right? Over the last, red blood cells, I think they live for 2 to 3 months. So this is an average of the blood sugar that you've had over the last 3 months. So it's the glycated hemoglobin is what we're essentially looking at. So I think that that's a really great I think I always like to look at HbA1c. The other ones I like to look at is fasting glucose. So I like to look at context, right? So we want to look at whenever we're thinking about, things that change or things that affect energy, it's always going to be, substrate availability, which is, how much food you have from the external environment or how much food you have stored on the body that you can utilize. Hormone regulation. So does your insulin respond appropriately? And then the other one I would probably add in there is like enzyme modification. Like how quickly can your enzyme sort of, like each individual enzyme sort of move things along the kinetic or move things along the chain. So
yeah, your basal blood glucose, that's a great point, because I worked clinically for 10 years, and we would see situations where, let's say someone is feeling dizzy, feeling faint, and they have a blood sugar of 300. If you don't realize what their baseline blood sugar is, you might give someone insulin when in fact they need glucagon or they need like orange juice to go the other way. Let's say their blood sugar baseline is 500. They're actually hypoglycemic at 300. So it's all, like you're saying, it's very relative. Obviously, that's not a great position to be in, but it does happen.
Oh God,
where
I can imagine like 300.
I know it does happen.
Yeah. Yeah, so I love that, and then I like, to your point, context is really important, right? So I don't tend to do OGTTs that much, but what I will say is, like, just look at your oral glucose tolerance test. What I will say is just look at your post-print, like check your blood sugar, 1 to 2 hours after you eat. So do it pre-prandial, like pre-meal. I would like, for me, I'm a bit of a stickler, so I like 70, 75, 80 milligrams per deciliter. But then at 2 hours, I want that number to be under 100, at least under 140, but ideally somewhere around 120 milligrams per deciliter is sort of what I would consider appropriate modulation or appropriate glucose, an appropriate glucose rise and fall. So we talked,
So
yeah.
this brings up a really good point. So I'm a formulator, and I was messing with berberine,
Hmm.
and I've been strict keto for a long time, but sometimes I do cyclical and targeted ketogenic dieting. And I decided to put berberine to the test and do a carbohydrate challenge to the point of your like oral glucose tolerance test, which is 75 grams of dextrose,
Yeah.
which is not fun.
And
I
gross.
decided to do, yeah, I
Yeah.
decided to do my own, which
Yeah.
was 2 Pop-Tarts and 5 double stuffed Oreos. And no, that's not very healthy,
Oh
but
my
I
God.
decided to have fun and test out the berberine.
Yeah.
And so 500 milligrams of berberine, which is the clinically studied dose.
Okay.
And when I didn't take the berberine, and I did this about a week apart, so I had like a true baseline and washout. When I didn't take the berberine, I started at like a baseline of like 65 to 75 on both of these. When I didn't take the berberine, I was close to, and I was taking my blood glucose every 30 minutes up to 2 hours, and then I stopped. At 2 hours, I was like around 200.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is crazy, like with my blood sugar. So,
Hmm.
and and it wasn't. I don't know how long it took to go back down. I stopped measuring. But when I took the berberine, I never got above 100, and at 1 hour, I was already going back down.
Wow. And you took the berberine with the meal or prior to the meal?
Just prior to, like within 20 minutes prior.
So do you know what the mechanism of action is with berberine? Like you said, it parallels metformin. Is it like an AMP kinase activate? Like how does it
Exactly.
work?
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly how it works. There's some other enzymatic effects that it has as well, but the main mechanism is AMPK. Yeah.
That's cool.
Hmm.
100.
It's
And it's
insane, right?
500 milligrams.
Uh-huh. Three
And
times a day is typical. And I recommend it like whether you're high carb, low carb, keto, on a cheat meal, whatever, like I recommend just staying on it. I really feel like it's a big part of my youthfulness, my energy, my blood sugar staying maintained. Like I think it's the most powerful compound that you can take outside of peptides that get experimental and aren't well studied. But I think
yeah.
that's the best thing that you can take that's natural.
And a lot of people take metformin for that reason. They take it as a prophylactic to
Yep.
enhance glucose disposal. But
Yeah.
one of the problems with metformin, you have to be careful with your B12, right? It tends to gobble up B12 a lot. Is that the same with berberine, or there's
It
no
hasn't
increase?
it hasn't been studied, and that's a great point. And I do take additional. I already take 5,000 micrograms twice a day of methylcobalamin.
Hmm.
So I that's a it's a good question, and that's not well known. So I do take additional B12 on top of that.
As an
So
insurance policy. Okay. All right. So we talked about glycation. Let's move it. You mentioned two other things. We talked about inflammation and we talked about oxidation. I think
yeah.
most people can understand what inflammation is. You already contrasted between acute and chronic inflammation. What are some of the deleterious effects that chronic low grade inflammation? How does that change the functioning or the efficacy of our mitochondria?
Oh man, pretty dramatically. Like again, like tracking back to the insufficient cellular energy, and that brings up another point of something I've been heavily looking into is deuterium, which that could be like a whole other discussion. Is I don't know if you've read much on deuterium depleted water, but it's like become my new obsession. Like the hydrogen ions are obviously involved in this electron transport chain and energy creation with the ATP, but deuterium is kind of like, let's say it's a fat hydrogen. Like just think of like, the skinny guy going through the turnstile and the fat guy kind of getting stuck in the turnstile. So
Mhm.
it's a heavy hydrogen. And what happens is deuterium is higher in our lower quality water, in our processed food, in like higher sugar type foods, we're finding that they're higher in deuterium, and that deuterium may be a issue with cancer, with diabetes, with insufficient cellular energy states, with autoimmunity. So it's creating havoc on the mitochondria being able to readily produce the energy it needs. That's an issue. I think another issue that doesn't get brought up, I'm kind of going on a sidetrack here, but is spirochetes. Like some of these other foreign invaders, be it like mold, be it like these various, like Lyme's disease, and like they found up to 70% of people that have Alzheimer's have some foreign invader in their brain. And that doesn't get addressed much, that like from our drinking water, sometimes that if you're in poorer countries, or from being in lakes, or taking hikes and just getting like different exposure to some of these sometimes too small to be seen creatures, they can have a lifelong impact on your energy production. So that's, and then, mold exposure as well. Like it's crazy, like these parasites and various things are involved in a lot of this. And basically it's the same thing where we're getting zapped for energy and we're not making enough energy. And the deleterious effect of that would be that, then you start, as a result of not making enough energy, you're like, it's kind of like you're pushing the gas pedal, or you're kicking the horse, and the horse has got no more, or the car is just kind of chunking along. And then, the engine starts being overworked and overheating, and the oil is getting thick and breaking down. And this is what happens in our system. We're like pushing it. And then what do we do? What do we do, like when our neurons aren't working well, or we feel low on energy? We go for caffeine. We go for M&Ms and Coca-Cola, and these try and like get this like quick fix. And of course that's like a downward spiral, right? So there you go. Like we're just kind of like faster and faster, like trying to push the limit on kind of like the sympathetic nervous system to get us out of this fix. And that's what we get. And I did that for years. Like I had Epstein-Barr virus, which is mono, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hashimoto's, fibromyalgia. And I was like constantly using energy drinks, fat burners, ephedrine, Himbine, like all this stuff. And it tanked me. Like I went from bad to so much worse, and extreme adrenal fatigue. And I was in hell for years.
It's funny. I was just interviewing Emily Fletcher, who is she's from Ziva Meditation. She's a big meditator. And we were talking about one day she was with, I think it was the CEO of Whole Foods, who saw, it was either her or her friend, drinking, one of those drinks that you just mentioned, is either a cup of coffee or, the Red Bulls or whatever. And he said, "Oh, your energy that you have is not your own." And just sort of walked away. So this is which I think is a really brilliant way to contrast. When you're reliant on the caffeine, when you're reliant on revving up the system, you're not actually enhancing your own ability, your own natural your natural ability to create energy. You're just relying on these exogenous resources. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And so like what's cool about like when you do take something like methylcobalamin, which is the active coenzymated form of B12, or you take alpha GPC, which is the optimized form of choline that passes the blood-brain barrier. Like the cool thing about these, they enhance your energy and your focus, but they also enhance your sleep. And that's when I can tell you, like, this is something that's optimizing you, and it's truly a nutrient when it gives you both. When you get better energy and better sleep, that's happening because you're more optimized. When something's coming at a cost, then that's probably not good to do chronically, like caffeine.
Right.
And caffeine comes at a cost, and a lot of these compounds, the Adderalls and concertas, which are amphetamines, or the caffeines or ephedrins, or whatever, nicotine, all these things are like coming at a cost.
And I think when we think about all these globally together, when you have that low grade inflammation, then you're gonna have this metabolic switch. Like we've been talking about energy being in the mitochondria. For my nerds that are listening, hashtag Nerd Army Unite. I love you guys. But that's we talk about this in we call this oxidative phosphorylation, which is the energetic the ATP production that happens in the mitochondria. When you are chronically inflamed, this is where we see less efficient means of producing energy. So we tend to switch from oxphos. We go from oxidative phosphorylation and we move to, more aerobic glycolysis, which is going to increase our reactive oxygen species. It's going to decrease insulin sensitivity. And then all of us, and, to your point, you call this insufficient cellular energy state, the cellular energetic state. If you don't have the insulin sensitivity, you're going to have less glucose uptake into the cell. And then mitochondria can't do anything because there's no substrates there.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It just makes me think about when you bring that up about oxidation and generating ROS, is that one of the ways that keto works is that you're not creating as much oxidation, and you are using an alternate fuel source, ketones. And you are insulin resistant, and you are in this insufficient cellular energy state, and you don't have enough glucose readily available for substrate. And that's why keto is a miracle. And people are like, wow, how does keto do all this stuff with like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and cancer and PCOS and all these things and diabetes? Like, how does it do all of that? It's ridiculous. Epilepsy. And that's how it does it. Like, it's literally like, that's the biggest way, is mitochondrial dysfunction, providing an energy substrate. You have less oxidation. And that's what, like, people are like, you're not getting enough fruits, so you're not getting enough antioxidants. Well, you're not creating as much oxidants to antioxidize.
To scavenge. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is how, like, the carnivores, like, they don't need to eat plants all day. Like, they, like they're not producing as much oxidation, so therefore they don't need as much antioxidants.
Let's talk about keto, because you and I have talked about this a lot. What is the and we're very, very aligned. In your opinion, can you describe what the ideal ketogenic diet looks like, and maybe contrast that, if you can, with that standard American diet or standard North American diet?
Well, let me start this off first by saying, like, you can eat shitty, like, no matter what diet I say. So
that's very
like
true.
I just watched that Game Changers documentary with, like, that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jackie Chan funded and James Cameron directed, and it's all about why the vegan diet is superior. And they show these athletes that, I switched to the vegan diet and I became super powered. And look, like, what is the diet you left? Like, that's the first thing I'll ask. Like, because I can show you a vegan that's eating Coca-Cola gummy bears and Miracle Burgers or whatever those things are called, and that's not healthy. And I can show you someone who's keto, who's eating just keto treats and ice creams and whatever all day long. That's not healthy. And there's someone who's eating carnivore that could be eating, like, hot dogs and bologna. And that's not healthy either. So, but look, if you're on carnivore and you're eating whole food and you're having organ meats from grass-fed, grass-finished, sources, free-range sources, and, you're eating tendon and ligament and skin and bone and all the things, cool. And then, you're vegan and you're eating just plant-based, organic, like, and, very conscious about how you're constructing it with complementary proteins, cool. And then, if you're like someone who's keto and you're doing, like, high fat, very low carbohydrate, and you're doing it in, like, a paleo kind of whole food way, cool. Like, so that's one of the things, like, I'd like to throw out first is, like, we should all agree on eating whole food because that's what we're meant for. And like keto isn't a new fad diet. Paleo isn't a new fad diet. The new fad diet is GMOs, antibiotics, artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, artificial flavors, like BST, RBGH, like all this stuff that's in the food supply. That's the like ultra processed food that's been engineered for high bliss point to trigger dopamine and serotonin. That's the new fad diet. And keto isn't new in the sense of maybe keto as like a high fat, very low carbohydrate hack is kind of new, but keto, meaning raising ketones, isn't new. Like probably 50% of the time up until the last 100 years, we've always been like that because we were eating low glycemic, high fiber carbohydrates. We were eating resistant starches. We were searching for our food and working hard to get it. We were hunting it. We were going days without eating. We called it starving then and not fasting. You know, and like you went into ketosis a lot. And now, and you know, like through the winter, you were probably typically eating, you know, animal meats and whatever. But I think that would be very common to be in ketosis. Now, this way of like eating very high fat, very low carb to elicit like more ketones, it's, you know, maybe that's a little bit of a hack, but it certainly works. And, you know, we got that from the epileptics and diabetics as a way to do that. But it's not a new fad to me, and I think we should agree on eating whole food. So those are some of the things I'd throw out on how to eat properly on keto. So like with keto, I would look to eat paleo. I would always start with like something paleo-ish, call it whatever you want, like Whole30, Ancestral, whatever, and start there and get off the ultra processed food. Reduce the sugar. Get your body moving. Just 10 minutes after you eat has a dramatic impact on your blood sugar. You know, you don't have to be like high intensity interval training and blood flow restriction and, you know, like all this stuff at the gym and like I'm doing interset stretching and I've got like bands while I'm doing like my dumbbells and
Right.
like
Just get the glucose in the muscle. Just get the glucose dispositive in the muscle. Move the legs a little bit. It's trapped there once it gets there. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Yeah.
I mean, I do that. I do that other crazy stuff, but start where you're at. Like, don't like freak out and like make it super complicated. And if, you know, you're 70 and listening to this and you're like, I don't know how to get going. I mean, just take a walk after you eat. That's it. Like 10 minutes and eat whole food and try and reduce these high bliss point foods. These foods have been engineered so that you overeat them. They override the satiety signal.
Right.
When you walk in the convenience store, it's the addiction store. You know, you walk in, it's sugar, it's alcohol, it's caffeine. You look around, everything's super colorful, and it's hard to like walk in and walk out of there. It's the store of addiction, and it's built off of impulse because you are low on energy and you're low on serotonin and your dopamine fixed. And you're like, what? I feel horrible. Like, how do I get out of this horrible feeling? The quickest, easiest answer is something that's in that store, but you'll get right back into that place and feel even worse right after. So it's a downward spiral, and we need to get off of that fix, get off of that engineered food, and get back to eating whole food where we do have satiety. If I was to give you a handful of like raw almonds, you could eat some, and then I cook them and it brings out a roasted note and a little sweetness. You could eat a little bit more. Then I cover them in oil, and now you're like, oh, it's got this fatty mouthfeel. This is good. And it's triggering something in your head. Cool. So now you're eating a little bit more. And then I add salt, and then I add honey, and then I add habanero. And now all of a sudden you can't like stop eating the whole bag. You can't eat just one. That's like what Lay's says. Like literally they're calling you out.
Yeah. I bet you can't just eat one. Yeah. That's
right.
The slogan. Yeah.
Right. So like these foods are engineered to hit multiple like senses, like
Yeah.
sweet, salty, chewy, like gooey, like crunchy, like, it's like, it's not just one thing anymore. And in nature, it's very typical that it's one or two things max, that it's maybe sweet and maybe acidic, or it's fatty and that's it. Like, but now like foods are being combined so that it's like overwhelming to your brain and you can't stop eating. If I was to give you a steak, like you can't eat easily like a second steak. But
Right.
if I give you like cookies or chips, it's like I can't like stop. Like you
But
can't.
yeah.
So this is like the idea of engineered food, and like you can listen to these guys talk about like that's all they do every day is work on how to, when you twist off that cap on your Coca-Cola and it goes, psh,
Mhm.
there's like things that are triggered in your brain that's like, it's
Refreshing.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the, the sweet and the acidic and the color and the, everything is thought about. Everything is meant to make you use more, buy more. There's actually a trick that they use with beverages that they make it sweet and flavorful up front, but empty in the back. Why? So you keep drinking it, keep feeling like, oh, this is good, I'm unfulfilled. Oh, this is good, I'm unfulfilled.
Hmm.
It's crazy. And people are like, why am I fat? And, it's not all your fault, legitimately. Like
Yeah.
there's a science to it.
Hmm. You mentioned, I love everything you're saying. I want to just come back to something. I want to make sure that we close the loop. You had mentioned resistant starches. This is something that you and I talk a lot about this in my online program. I would love for you to define what a resistant starch is, why it's important, and how, things that we may not have associated with being on the ketogenic diet can be considered that. And then we can come back. I want to come back to the, this chemical castration that is a big food. But I just want to make sure that we close the loop on resistant starches. If someone's hearing that and that's the first time that they've ever heard it, what is that?
Yeah, so it's digestive resistant starches. And the interesting thing is like the foods that we always are associating with elevating blood sugar. Oh, it's starchy, and like that means that it's raising blood sugar. And it literally looks like organized kind of glucose units in the starchy chain. But the way that it's set up in this chain is resistant to digestion, and it's only when we heat them up and break them down. And I think about, so like a raw potato you could eat like an apple and it would have no glycemic impact. This might blow people away. They're like, potato, like that's like table sugar on the glycemic index, right? But
Cooked.
it's
When it's cooked. Yeah.
exactly when it's mashed potatoes
Mhm.
and you've whipped it and heated it and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's like table sugar. It's basically like sugar units, right? Like
Mhm.
it's glucose. But when you have it raw or cold, it's resistant starch. It's resistant to digestion, and it actually feeds the gut. It
Mm.
actually feeds the microbiota in the gut. So not only does it not have a glycemic impact, is keto friendly, but it's feeding the gut. And raw is probably the best state, but like cold does make it fairly resistant. So like having like if you're going to have a potato, like, and raw doesn't sound very delicious to you, you could have like a cold potato salad. I wouldn't have a ton of it, but like this does leave it in a fairly resistant state. And it's very different than having mashed potatoes. And this is true, like, again, you probably think bananas. Bananas are super high glycemic. That's a fruit, totally off limits. You can have green banana starch, and it's a resistant starch that feeds the gut. And you have to be careful with some of these starches because they do feed the gut. They can cause some GI distress early on. Like you have to kind of go easy, like,
Mhm.
and like you have to kind of taper.
Dose your way up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
but like this is a great way if like maybe you're keto and you want to make a banana bread by using like almond flour, coconut flour, and adding some green banana starch or something. You can do that. Like um, and make a pretty tasty banana bread. So, and another example is like sushi. You can potentially have some rice. If it's cold, a little more on the undercooked side, like not as sticky. And another like good hack is like literally just make it as cold as possible. That's ideal. And then dipping it in like MCT and soy sauce, maybe like the, Bragg's aminos
Mm-hmm.
that taste like soy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great way to like, you can still have some sushi and be in ketosis.
And the thing that I love about resistant starch is, to your point, it feeds the microbiota on the large intestine, and then they give you a present back, right? They give you butyrate, they give you that short chain
Exactly.
fatty acid, which again, fatty acids being a substrate for energetic production, but then there's a whole, I mean, there's butyrate has all these beautiful things that it does. It helps with hyperpermeability in the gut. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. So
Cool side note on butyrate is that butyrate C4, the short chain fatty acid you're mentioning,
mm,
is also, think beta hydroxybutyrate, the key ketone, right?
right.
Which is also a 4 carbon molecule. And there's some interconvertibility there, so that like one of the reasons that we see like ketogenic carnivorous animals like are able to like produce so much the short chain fatty acid in the gut might be like there's a correlation there between ketosis and the short chain fatty acid in the gut, like back and forth. There's some interplay that when you administer C4 butyrate, we actually see beta hydroxybutyrate go up in the blood.
Oh, I did not know that. That's cool. That's really cool. And
Yeah.
that, I think resistant starches as well are a way that you can make keto sustainable, because one of the things that I have often heard from people when they're starting keto, like I tried keto, but they hit this hungry point, and no matter what it was, they weren't, no matter how much fat or protein they were consuming, they couldn't kind of get rid of that hunger. And I think part of that is because the microbiome is starving, because most people, the way that they do keto is not with a lot of insoluble fiber. I like to do a lot of green leafy vegetables. I like to do things that are going to feed the microbiome and help sort of clean that up. But a lot of people get off of keto because they're like, I was so hungry, I don't know why I could never satiate. I could never feel satiated. And resistant starches, I think, are an important way to attenuate that.
Yeah, and I still have like beans from time to time. Like again, if they're more in the undercooked or cold state,
Yeah.
I love to have some beans, and they're high in fiber, high in protein, and resistant starches if served appropriately.
So you mentioned fasting, and the ketogenic diet, I think in general, is a fasting mimetic.
Hmm.
Why do you think, and I'd love for you to geek out on this, why is it advantageous for us as it relates to the mitochondria and just generally for us to be metabolically flexible, for us to be able to shift and flux between a fed state and a fasted state?
Yeah, I think it is ideal that you're dual fuel capable. I mean, there's some other fuels you can say, free fatty acids and lactate and blah blah blah, but essentially ketones and glucose, and having that flexibility, I think makes a lot of sense. And we are omnivores, right? Like I feel like we're adapted for this. There are carnivores that I think are really adapted for ketones, and then there are herbivores, plant eaters, that
Mm-hmm.
are adapted for glucose. But I think that we, being omnivores, people make the argument for why carnivore is so awesome or why vegan is so awesome. But I think if you look at it, like we have the ultimate flexibility. It's a beautiful thing in terms of evolution, that we could be by the ocean, we could be in the trees, we could be in a barren winter wasteland, we could be in whatever climate all over the world and find a food source. That's incredible. Why
Mm-hmm.
would we want to like limit that in terms of our evolution when we're evolved to be superior as a result of that? Like that's a beautiful thing in terms of evolution. We're like a rare species that can make use of plants and animals for food sources, and we can make use of ketones and glucose as a fuel source. So I think being dual fuel is ideal. And there's times that I feel like like I use ketones, like I try and stay fat adapted, keto adapted. But like when I play volleyball all day, like I'm going to tomorrow, and I'm playing in a tournament tonight actually, but I'm in the Dallas Heat and I'll be like out there for 8 to 10 hours. And I have carbohydrate. I have quick carbohydrate, sugar, it can be gummy bears, it could be whatever, like fruit, like while I'm playing.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I'm also keto adapted. So I feel like I'm getting the best of both worlds. And this is super ideal. And actually by the end of like, I maybe stop having the sugar, about 4 hours out. And by the end of my night, I'm already back in ketosis. It's because I'm well adapted and I'm like running through it, and I'm certainly like giving a lot of effort, but I'm already back in ketosis. So I feel like I'm well adapted to use both. And in terms of survival and evolution and longevity, I think that makes so much sense. The problem is, and you can look throughout the world, most of the world is on a high carbohydrate diet. And you say, well, why aren't they sick? Why aren't they having all these issues? I can tell you, because they're not having ultra processed food. They're not exercising. They're not sedentary. They're not having glyphosate and GMOs and antibiotics and xenoestrogens and on and on and on. And they're not having Coca-Cola and whatever. They're having whole food. They're having low glycemic carbohydrate. They're having resistant starches. They're having, meat, and they're having healthy oils. They're not having like these processed fats either, like these trans fats or these highly processed vegetable oils. Like even canola is crap, and that's all through Whole Foods, right?
Right. And one of the things that they're probably also doing is they're probably not sleep deprived as well. I think that there's a unique thing in the North American. We just, for whatever reason, it's rampant in our culture it's almost like a badge of honor. Like, oh, I pulled an all-nighter, and it's completely destructive and completely, when we talk about energy, you become hyperinsulinemic. You don't. Whenever my kids, for me, when my sleep is terrible, it's because my kids have woken me up. They've had a nightmare, or they, find their way into my room or whatever. And the next day, working out is, I do not want to work out, and I want to eat more crap, and I want to, so.
So they've shown that when you get like even just 6 or 6.5 hours or less of sleep, that you are acutely insulin resistant.
Right.
And that the neurons are actually firing slower.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when you feel like you're in a brain fog and you're like, my brain's kind of slow, it actually is slower. Right. And when you feel like more impulsive and deprived of that energy, and you need something for your neurons to get going, and you feel like just tired because you're in an insufficient cellular energy state, because you're in an acute state of mitochondrial dysfunction, what do? You grab caffeine, you grab sugar, so you get in like this cycle of like, I don't have enough energy, so I'm going to reach for this stuff that's going to hurt my energy, but give me acute energy.
Right. And it activates, it's a stress signal, right? When you're not sleeping well, this is also going to activate your sympathetics. And, then we have this whole other, HPA axis dysregulation that can sort of fall from that too.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. So you are the master formulator. You are the world's foremost master formulator. You've already mentioned a couple of things, but I wanted to just be a bit geekier if we could. So we mentioned berberine. What are some of if there was, walk me through what would be some of your favorite foundational supplements for combating some of the things that we've talked about. So we've talked about glycation, oxidation, inflammation, insufficient cellular energetic states, brain energy gap. What would be some of we've talked about berberine. What are some other ones that you love?
Yeah. Okay. So berberine first, cinnamon, polyphenol second. I like going for the true cinnamon, which is Ceylon cinnamon, for blood sugar. So we'll address that with glycation. So next up with oxidation, I was mentioning those before. These could be from food sources or supplement sources, but getting things like EGCG, resveratrol, pterostilbene.
Yeah, sorry. EGCG is from green tea. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Pterostilbene from blueberries, resveratrol, red wine. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things would help with oxidation. Quercetin is another good one from onions. Those are great antioxidants to look at. Certainly, you can take a liposomal vitamin C or glutathione. Glutathione is a master antioxidant. Vitamin C is obviously really important, actually potently anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer, interestingly. So the liposome is really protective of these compounds and enhances their bioavailability pretty dramatically, more like getting them via IV. It's the closest thing you could do, barring getting an IV. Obviously, IV would be superior.
So liposomal glutathione, what is the dosage that you would recommend with that?
A couple grams, like both with the vitamin C and the glutathione, I would say like 2 or 3 grams liposomal a couple times a day.
So the
Um,
total dose is 2 to 3 grams, or 2 to 3 grams
no,
at each
per dose, yeah,
per dose. Okay.
yeah. And then boosting NAD is important. So in the citric acid cycle, also called the Krebs cycle, there's NAD and NADH,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of that last stop before OAA. This is super nerdy in the citric acid
Let's
cycle,
do
but
it. Let's go there.
but it's important with the NAD to NADH ratio to try and boost NAD. And so NAD, like the ways that you can do that, the best way to do that would be an NAD IV. But NAD is essentially it's niacin is it's more complicated than that, but it's a niacin based compound. And so when you're doing it, you have to do NAD slowly over hours, like 2, 3, 4 hours, to get
Mm-hmm.
enough NAD without it burning. I don't know if you've experienced like
Oh,
the
I've heard
niacin.
people, they're like, this is the word, like the NADIV. People are like,
Well,
this is the worst thing ever. They feel terrible.
it's called paresthesis. It's that burning and tingling. For
Mm.
some people, when I was in the hospital, like niacin, it's crazy how dramatically like bio individual it is. That like some people, it literally looks like they have a sunburn, like transiently, like maybe for
Wow.
like 30 minutes. It looks like their whole face is red and they feel like they're on fire. And some people are like, I think I'm having a heart attack. And it's crazy. Like with niacin, this happens to some degree with beta alanine too, but it does happen with NAD.
So is it
But taking
nicotinamide riboside that you're recommending, or straight up NAD?
so
NR or
that's a good
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So NAD doesn't really work that well orally. True Niagen, nicotinamide riboside, NR, it seems to work okay. I slightly lean towards NMN in the research.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's another way to potentially boost NAD, but I think both of them are good. There's just no great way. I think they're both good, but doing the IV is by far and away the most superior. Um, I hope there's more research here and some better ways to do this orally in the near future. But going down that line, did you want to ask something there?
No,
Oh,
I think we need more research there too, because if I
mhm.
could just eat NAD, I would. Like if I
Right,
could, because
right.
we talk about this being the fountain of youth and this is slows down the aging process, but NAD you can't that's not the transport. And from my limited understanding, like the transport molecule is nicotinamide. So you have to, NR is, you know, in the liver, we have NR and then it can convert that to NAD. But then in order to get out to the tissues, it still needs to go as nicotinamide. And then once it's taken up by the cell, then the nicotinamide can convert it into NAD.
Yeah,
So is it NR? Is it NMN? Because the cell, if it does, once it takes up the nicotinamide, if it's not converted to NAD, then it has to methylate it. It has to get rid of it. So, um, I am, I know just enough to be dangerous here. Like I don't understand NAD, and I don't understand if I could, like I said, if I could eat NAD, I would. And there's been, from what I've read, nicotinamide riboside is you can see trace amounts of it in the muscle, and you can see it taken up by the liver and stuff, and the enterocytes can kind of make use of it, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Hands up,
it's
I don't
just
know.
that
Yeah.
the data is kind of equivocal, unfortunately, with it. It's not super compelling. I think it's worth taking right now, that or NMN, but it's not
Mhm.
compelling enough. It's nothing like I would say like taking the IV.
It's not like the
But
berberine. Like the berberine, we're
right,
sure. We're like, we
right,
know about, yeah, there's been some good clinical studies. Yeah, okay.
right. And then, but along those lines, I think it's important to look at the mitochondrial function with the electron transport chain and looking at things like CoQ10 and
Yeah.
PQQ. So both of the Q brothers are worth taking.
The Q brothers.
Um,
I like that.
PQQ and CoQ10. Ubiquinol is the kind of optimized form of CoQ10. Makes a bigger difference as you age. You have trouble getting into the reduced form of CoQ10. So the ubiquinone versus ubiquinol. Um, so if you're over 45, I would consider buying the ubiquinol. If you're younger, you have no problem reducing it. And then PQQ, that one's expensive. That's the biggest problem. I
Hmm.
like taking higher doses. I think like 20 milligrams plus per dose is ideal, but it gets pricey right now. So
20
um,
milligrams per dose. How many times a day? Or just once a day?
no, I think multiple times a day. I think like 3 times a day. But again, it gets pricey. But that's one of these things like people might say like, I don't know, like this stuff seems expensive, but I'm telling you, like of all the things you can do, it's like working along this mitochondrial pathway is so important. And
Hmm.
for all the reasons that I've stated here, like it's powerfully anti-aging, anti-disease, pro-energy. Like your your energy is correlative with your allostatic load that you can deal with, your hormetic stressors that you can deal with, like the bucket of stress essentially. Like there's eustress, which is good stress, and distress, which is negative stress. And you can deal with, like, you have a bucket essentially, this allostatic load that like you can deal with so much stress. And when your body has more energy, and you, especially when you take on hormetic stressors and you improve the threshold for that bucket, then you can deal with stress better,
Right.
and be it physiologic stress or emotional stress. But I think that's important, that like the better we're functioning, the more optimized. I mean, prime example, like when you were talking about before, like your example of not getting enough sleep.
Hmm.
And let's say you come in with 5 hours of sleep and your neurons are firing slower, and you're in this acute insulin resistance, and you're in an insufficient cellular energy state, and you're feeling low, and you start making impulsive decisions. You don't only just get the donut and the Red Bull and the whatever, but you make impulsive decisions that aren't necessarily healthy decisions for you. It might be with pornography or sex, or what, all these other addictions or things that might fuel that fire, so to speak,
Work.
temporarily.
With
Right,
my
right.
hand sheepishly raised. Work. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
So yeah, so think about that. So when we're in an optimized state, when our mitochondria are functioning optimally, we're not only anti-aging, anti-disease, pro-energy, but we're able to deal with stress better. We're able to increase the bucket, the allostatic load, and we're able to take on hormetic stressors and have them be a eustress, a positive stress, and not a distress. Like, so when we take that cold shower, that it helps us adapt. When we do keto, like it helps us adapt. When we do high intensity interval training, it helps us adapt. And you can look at things like heart rate variability and say like, wow, I'm like in a really good state and I'm adapting and I'm getting more healthy by taking on this eustress.
Hmm.
But if I was low on energy, under recovered, then what happens? This becomes a distress. Like some of these things that could be seen as healthy, if you're not in an optimized state, can sometimes be counterproductive. Like exercise can be counterproductive.
It's so interesting you say this, because I think that for myself personally, I've had to learn the hard way the value of recovery. So I, you know, used to just head down, work, work, work. And no matter where I was in my menstrual cycle, no matter how my energetic, how my ebbs and flows were going. And when you like all your gains, whether that is physiological, adaptogenic or otherwise, they happen in recovery. So we know this with sleep, right? The memory, the things that you've learned over the day, they get encoded from short to long-term memory over sleep. But when you recover, whether it's the physical exertion or otherwise, if you don't give yourself that time to rest, your body will hold on to fat like it's a life insurance policy. And we tend to, in practice, I'll see this with, patients with excess weight through the belly, excess cortisol weight, but all the gains happen in recovery. And I think for the high achievers, people who self-identify as type A personalities, or even the lack, for lack of a better term, the people who love to biohack, doing nothing is sometimes one of the most productive things that you can do.
100%. Totally agree. I mean, sleep is probably one of the most powerful biohacks. I'm going to get on the sidetrack here because one of the other biohacks that's so important, I just read a study on this, that it was 11 to 15% increased longevity when you choose to be happy.
Oh, wow.
That's like 12 years.
Wow.
12 years added to your life from being happy.
What were they defining as choosing?
Well, I'm saying I think that's subjective. Like, how you might fill out a survey is like your degree of happiness. I feel like it's subjective. I mean, It depends like what makes you happy, and maybe your baseline state of happiness. But I think happiness is a choice. Like every day you can choose whether you're happy or not, whether you're positive or not. But one of the best studies that looked at longevity is the Harvard study that is about 80 years in now. And they started with poorer areas of Boston and more affluent areas of Boston, and looking at working men. I think this started like back in the 40s, like right after World War II, maybe. And they looked at these men, and early on they were looking at socioeconomic stuff and maybe disease states, and then as things progressed, they started looking at their partners and their kids, and it was both male and female, and they looked at genetics and blood work and all the things. And the number one determinant of longevity that they found was quality of relationships over everything. So I mean, I find this fascinating. Like, when you look at the blue zones, that where there is so much longevity, you see like everyone's trying to break down like what food are they eating? It's Mediterranean, and is it the red wine and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that stuff plays a role, don't get me wrong, but they also sit and eat dinner for 2.5 hours and talk to each other with extended family. They're not speeding down the highway at 80 miles an hour eating a Big Mac and like cranking up the radio. Like they prepared their meal. They bought the food fresh. They might have grown the food. Then they're sitting down for 2.5 hours, eating the meal, talking through all their issues. It's therapy. And then, like they might drink a glass of wine, not to get drunk, but they're drinking it over hours of sitting there and relaxing and taking time out. Like you're saying, like how important that is as a hack. So they're getting quality relationships. They're getting happiness. They're eating quality food. They're taking time out. They're relaxing. And surprise, surprise, these are the people that live the longest. What else they're not doing is what you also mentioned, that we're depriving ourselves of sleep. They're not looking at blue light devices at night. Instead, they're eating and they're relaxing and they're talking. And we are like, got our cell phone in our face, like baking our eyes in a dark room, and we're not releasing melatonin.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore we can't get to sleep, we can't initiate sleep, and we get a shorter duration of sleep, so the quality of sleep goes down, and then we're not getting enough recovery, and therefore, like, many of the repair processes aren't going on. There's endocrine dysfunction, like you're mentioning, cortisol is elevated.
Mm-hmm.
There's acute insulin resistance and mitochondrial dysfunction, and on and on and on. So there's the acute inflammation. And so we just go down that spiral, and we are one of the only species that deprives ourselves of sleep. I mean, it seems crazy, like, whether we're looking at our blue light devices like the TV or the cell phone, or it's because we have to stay up late and watch Monday Night Football or Game of Thrones or, whatever. Like, we find all these reasons to stay up, or we're out at the bar and there's artificial light there and the music and stimulation and, push, push, push. And then we're exhausted. And we actually there's a term called social jet lag from like what we do on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time 7 days a week. We do this thing where on the weekends, we stay up 4 hours later. And then you literally have social jet lag where on Monday morning, it feels like you traveled to Europe. Right. For the people that are living in America listening to this.
Right.
So you feel
or West
like
Coast to East Coast, right? Like
right,
flying
yeah.
from like LA to New York.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you feel that jet lag, and that's why Monday mornings suck. Mm-hmm. If you were to try going to bed at the same time and getting up at the same time, Monday morning might not suck. I mean, you might need to change your job if you hate it, but that's a different discussion. But I think largely it's because what we're doing to our bodies and our circadian rhythm.
Yeah, and I think everything that you're saying makes so much sense. And when we can talk about all the longevity hacks and all the health span, strategies. But to your point, if you're not happy, there's not really an argument for living longer if you're miserable. So finding, we've talked about, I have friends, one of my friends, he runs the Broken Brain podcast, Drew, and he talks a lot about the power of community. And, when we talk about this, and, we can go down a whole rabbit hole in terms of like what happens when you are with people that like and trust and you're parasympathetics, and when you're with people that you're just sort of being superficial with. But having people that like and trust, having a community of people who get you and understand you and love you no matter what, like not just despite your flaws, but because of your flaws, this is what is going to really lead to, I think, I'm just, piggybacking on your comment around happiness. This is the key to longevity is finding happiness both within, but also in a community around you.
Yeah. And you can get lost in all these biohacks. I think we're both biohackers, but you can become stressed from trying to figure out what biohack do I need to do? Like, should I have like my MCT oil at this time and, right. Take my pyracetam and, metformin and blah, mm-hmm. You could get so caught up in this stuff, and I need to take my cold plunge and I got to activate cold my brown adipose tissue. And, mm-hmm. You can like freak yourself out where like, yeah, these can be good things, but you're stressing yourself out, and it could be a distress where it's counterproductive. And the most powerful things are happiness, quality of relationships, sleep, nutrition, unplugging, having purpose in life, knowing your why.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are
sex as well.
Lots of sex.
Lots of orgasms for
women. It's interesting with sex, actually, that when you have sex, your body thinks that you are ready to reproduce. And so it actually makes you younger in a number of ways because it's triggering a number of things in your body that kind of keep you in a younger state, mm-hmm. Because your body thinks that you're, trying to have a baby, essentially. So it's a good thing to stay active sexually, for sure.
So I think that this has been an amazing tangent, and I want to continue on it. And I was going to ask you about Kirk Herman, and I want to ask you about
I was going to go into all the supplements, but
like exogenous ketones and histone deacetylate. Okay.
So wow.
Let me give you some rapid fire questions, because I think
Yeah.
just for the audience to fall in love with you even more. I'm just going to shoot some questions, just the first answer that comes out to you. What is the one health practice that you stick to the most regularly?
I think friendships. That the reason I am so blessed, I think, in terms of my career, so successful, and my everyone's like, man, your momentum is insane. Like, and I just say, like, look at all the people around me. Like, look at how blessed I am. And I just freely love and I freely give myself wholeheartedly. I have been burned so much because I'm very giving, but it's not going to change me. I'm not going to stop being generous. And I have amazing people like you in my life because of the energy I'm putting out is what's coming back to me. And it's so important that yes, you've been burned, yes, you've been hurt, but don't let that change what's going out, because that's what's going to come back. So for me, like, that's been the most important thing, is that I just love on the people around me and I give. And amazingly, I'm surrounded by loving givers.
I love that. What is a superpower that you have that most people don't know about?
Super. It's a dumb one that I'm thinking of right now. If you can watch this on video, is this is I'm double jointed. So
Oh, wow.
um, that's one. But I think my superpower, I think, is the one we were just talking about. I mean, most people know, like, I'm super hardworking, but I think my greatest superpower is that realizing that I am I am so broken, but my broken is my beautiful. Like, that's what, like, I am blessed that I have, like, a pituitary adenoma. I'm blessed that I have my Epstein-Barr virus, chronic fatigue syndrome, Hashimoto's, fibromyalgia. I had a car accident where I have, like, two artificial discs in my neck. Like, I have been through so much stuff health-wise, and I I'm blessed for it. That's what led to me biohacking. That's what led to my empathy, like connecting with all these people. Why I spend probably 2 hours a day just answering questions at no cost,
Hmm.
like, just because I care. I care, and like, it led me to become the world's greatest formulator. It led me to become, like, the biochemist, the RD, the certified sports nutritionist, all this stuff, because I just wanted to dig in and, one, find the answers to fix myself, but two, like, really start connecting with people and helping them so that they don't have to go through the things I went through. And for me, that's my most powerful superpower. Like, if I didn't if I didn't go through all those things, like, the obstacles the way, right? Like, if I didn't go through all those things, then I wouldn't be the person I am. I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't connect with people like I do. And I wouldn't have my why. So I'm like, I would never take that away. It's the thing that's made me, like. And I would always say that, like, whatever you're thinking right now is your weakness is actually probably your superpower. You're
Right.
hiding it away, and
Hmm.
it's the thing you're so blessed for that makes you unique. And once you let it out, you'll become so powerful. Once you tell the story, you'll have your why and you'll start connecting with people. Once I started telling people about my suicidal thoughts and depression, my autoimmunity, all these issues that I've had in the past, people started deeply connecting with me. And I'd be at conferences, I've done documentaries and TV shows and all this stuff. And I was always worried about, like, do I tell this story? It's not very scientific. I've always just done science stuff. But when I tell the story at any conference, like, I just did Health Optimization Summit in London, and again, I was like, like, people are going to be like, just get to the science, get to the supplements, get to the mitochondrial stuff.
Hmm.
But I told my story, and so many people came up to me afterwards and, like, said, thank you for telling that story. And I actually cared about the other stuff you're talking about because you told the story. And I connected with you over the story. And now, like, it's so cathartic to me to tell my story, and it's so deeply connecting and building that tribe. that you're talking about. That's so important. And so it's given me my why. And now I'm not hiding away all these things because, registered dietitian, sports nutritionist, biochemist, like you're supposed to be like perfect. You're supposed to be in great shape, in great health, blah, blah, blah. And I've been obese. I've been in pain, inflamed, tired, can't get out of bed some days, hurting, depressed, suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm telling that story and I'm saying, that's why I'm doing all these things. And I need your help too. When I have my tribe, you give me energy, you give me purpose. So thank you.
I think that what I love about that is it's demonstrating that someone like you with the accolades that you have, we are all more alike than we are different. And we've all had struggles. And I think that the mess is the message. Like Chris, our friend, will talk about this. The mess is the message. One of my mentors, I hope I'm going to get him on the podcast soon. His name is Philip McKernan. And he talks about, your gifts are right beside your wounds. So this is just what to sort of wrap it in a bow. I completely agree with you. And I think that I've had, people will be like, well, you're a doctor, you're supposed to look a certain way, talk a certain way. And yes, but we're all human at the end of the day. We're all human with human experiences looking to connect with people. So I just love everything that you've just shared. Thank you for being so vulnerable and so open.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
So if people want to find out more about you, where can I direct people to find you? Are you online? Are you on the interwebs? Where can we find you?
Yes, ShawnWells.com, ShawnWells, and then at Zone Halo, ZoneHalo on Instagram. And that would be great. And I'm here to help you in any way I can, really. Like my mission in life is to serve. So if any of this connects with you and you need my help, then I'm here to help you.
Thank you so much, Shawn. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.